Hello guys, welcome back to AP Government and Politics. In our previous lesson, we focused mainly on the preamble. So now we're going to move on to Article 1. So let's get started. Now, starting in Section 1, this article outlines the powers of the legislative branch. So we are going over the powers of the legislative branch. Okay? Which also includes both chambers, so the Senate and the House of Representatives, which makes up Congress. So here's Congress, and here are the two houses right there. And this is what we call a bicameral legislature. So let me write that down. Bicameral legislator. Okay? All right. Which is a legislature composed of two separate chambers. Now, the founders believed that Congress would be the new branch of central government. As you remember from our first lecture, that the founders had a considerable amount of debates and compromises on this topic. This two-house system was established through the Great Compromise during the Constitutional Convention. Now, as you know, Congress has the ultimate authority to make laws. So that's what the legislative branch does. So moving on to Section 2 here. So let's move on. Congress has the ultimate authority to make laws, as I stated earlier. And you can think of the House. So now we're getting to Section 2, which highlights the House of Representatives. And you can think of this house known as the People's House. Let's write that down. The People's House. Now, the House of Representatives are elected every 2 years. So every 2 years, we have an election. We go to vote for the House of Representatives. In Federalist Paper 51, written by James Madison, he said that it is essential to liberty that the government in general should have a common interest with the people. So it is particularly essential that a branch of it under consideration, the House, should have an immediate dependence on and an intimate sympathy with the people. So, what are the qualifications for a person to be a member of the House of Representatives? So, here are the qualifications. So, first off, you have to be 25 years old. Second, you have to be a citizen of the United States for 7 years. And you must be a resident of the state in which you reside in. So, for example, if you want to be a member of the House of Representatives for Michigan, but you live, in Ohio, you cannot run in Ohio. You have to run in Michigan because you do live in Michigan. So let's move on here. All right, so the number of representatives for a state depends on population, which included indentured servants and the 3/5 compromise. So this is where we have here the 3/5 compromise, as I stated in our previous lesson about the infamous 3/5 compromise. There's nothing really accomplishing of having a 3/5 compromise. Because all this changed through the 14th Amendment. Now, if you think having the 3/5 compromise was bad, right here, Native Americans weren't even counted at all. They weren't even part of this process. Native Americans, they weren't counted, as a population. So they counted the whole free persons, so not slaves as well. So here we have a concept of a census. So it says representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among several states, which may be included within this union according to the respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all persons. The actual enumeration shall be within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States within every subsequent term of 10 years. So here we have the concept of a census. Right there. All right, which was supposed to be conducted every 10 years. And the purpose of the census is to not only get the population of the United States, but the results were used to reapportion seats in the House of Representatives to each state, making each state responsible for redistricting, which is the act of redrawing congressional boundaries to achieve equal representation in each of the congressional districts, which means one person, one vote. However, politics gives way to cheat the redistricting system by doing gerrymandering, which is the drawing of House district boundaries to the benefit of one part over another. Now, let's kind of go over here. So now, the number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000. But each state shall have at least one representative until such enumeration shall be made. So each state got one representative for every 30,000 people. So for example, if Texas has a population of 600,000 people, they will need 20 representatives for Texas. All right. So this can be referred to as congressional districts. So we call this here congressional districts. Congressional districts. Okay. Since the enactment of the Reapportionment Act of 1929, Congress has struggled to find an equitable way to allocate seats in the states, and they obviously had some sort of an issue with the proportions based on population in relation to representatives in their states. Now, if a member of Congress dies during their term as a governor, they will hold a special election. So this is where this comes in. So you have the governor will hold a special election in order to fill that particular vacancy. And you can see that the vacancies happen. The executive authority here is the governor. All right, shall issue the writ of election to fill such vacancies. Whoops. All right. So the next one is the House of Representatives shall choose their speaker and other officers and shall have the sole power of impeachment. Oh, here's a good power to have. Impeachment. So the House of Representatives have impeachment power. So although House members are elected by the people, they also have the right to elect their own leaders as well, including the Speaker of the House and the House of Representatives, which is very unique in the sense that they are the only body in Congress that can impeach or formally the president or any elected official. So they have this impeachment power to impeach the president or any other elected official. So moving on to section 3, adding little marks here. So section 3 is each state will have 2 senators representing them in Congress for 6 years. Now, earlier state legislatures chose their own state leaders, but that was changed through the ratification of the 17th Amendment. So we have 2 senators from each state chosen by the legislature for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. So basically, we'll have an election every 2 years. So when we go to vote, we're electing a new senator every 2 years. Now, what are the requirements? So in order to be a senator, let's get a different color here. You must be 30 years old, been a citizen of the United States for 9 years, and when elected, you must be a resident of the state in which they represent. So like I said, if you want to run in Pennsylvania and you're a resident in Maryland, you cannot run in Pennsylvania. You will have to run in Maryland instead. Now, in this portion here, the vice president of the United States shall be the president of the Senate, but shall have no vote unless they be equally divided. So there's a split vote on a particular law, then the vice president will vote to break that particular tie. Also, they in addition to that, this also includes the president pro tempore who runs the Senate, and when the VP is away, or if the vice president becomes the POTUS. So when the vice president, if something happens to the president, obviously the vice president becomes. There are some powers that the Senate has, which are very important, and they include, which can only happen with the 2/3 vote, and this is where we get the pro tempore here. Let me go back a little bit. Here's the pro tempore right here. The whole spiel. Alright. So, obviously, as I highlighted the powers of the House, now I can kind of go over the powers of the Senate. So these powers can only happen unless there's a 2/3 vote. So here are the powers of the Senate. Let me use a different color just to switch it up a bit. Let's go purple this time. So here the Senate shall have sole power to try impeachment. So they also have impeachment power. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. So they do have impeachment powers. Only to those people that are accused of committing crimes and must be under oath when trying an official. They can remove convicted people from their jobs, but can't punish them in any other way. Okay? So they can't punish them at all, but they can remove them. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court will be in charge when the Senate is trying to impeach the president. So here it is. The President of the United States is tried. The Chief Justice shall preside. All right? So when the president is tried, the Chief Justice must preside. That's got a good ring to it. All right? So that's pretty cool. To section 4. This one's quite cool. This one highlights elections and meetings. I'm using a different color this time. Let's try yellow. I'm gonna do yellow this time. This one's all about elections and meetings. All right. So, in addition to the power to impeach, the Senate also has the power to decide when, where, and how to hold elections for their state senator and representatives. However, Congress does have the power to pass laws changing those laws, but they can't determine where state legislators meet to choose senators. So this is kind of what this whole section is all about. And the last portion here, the Congress is required to meet once a year on the first Monday, right here, on the first Monday in December, unless Congress passes a law designating a different day. However, this was changed through the ratification of the 20th Amendment. All right, so let's move on to Section 5 here. Here, we are talking about the procedural laws. So let me go back to a different color. Going over procedural laws. Now, there are procedural rules, shall I say? I'll say rules. Rules. In Congress, especially of how elections should be ran for its members. In regards to passing laws, a majority of a quorum must be present. However, there are some instances where a member might be absent that could include maybe because of hearing of a subcommittee that the member might be on. However, there may be instances where they can penalize a member that doesn't attend. So, although you can get away with not being present, however, if this particular group does not like the senator, then they might impose some penalties. Now, Congress has enough power where they can make their own rules, stated here, and punish their members for misbehavior, right? So they might for disorderly behavior, and expel a member if 2/3 vote is cast. So I would ask here, where is it in the separation of powers and checks and balances? Where is the presence of checks and balances where Congress can make their own rules without oversight, right? So that will be a question of no checks and balances. No balance of power or separation of power. Let's move on here. So Congress is required to keep and make their own records of their activities, and will publish these records from time to time. So here we go. So publish your own records, publish them from time to time. And they can keep some of those records confidential, so they have discretion on whether they want to keep such proceedings confidential if they want to. Now, these records are known as the congressional record, and it also includes how a member voted on a particular law. All right, so I think a good example of maybe having confidential records is probably during 9/11, where they would have congressional confidential records for the sake of national security. Now, Congress here, as we move forward right about here, Congress cannot take a break no longer than 3 days. So they can't take a break no longer than 3 days without an agreement, and they must be in the same location. All right, section 6 here. Now we get into money. So let's use a different color here. We use pink. I'm gonna use pink. So let's use that. Salaries. We're talking pay, salaries, and restrictions. All right, so congressional members are paid by the Treasury Department. So that's how they get their money. They get paid by the Treasury. They cannot be arrested for crimes except for treason and felonies, and they do not have to answer questions outside of Congress about anything they say while meeting in Congress. So that information is what we consider to be privileged. Yeah, privilege. Which include speech or debate. While they are a senator, they cannot have a new civilian job or jobs with higher salaries in the U.S. government while serving their term in Congress. So they can't have like a secondary job. They are bound. They are bound by being a member of the in Congress. So here it is. No Senate representative shall have any civil office under the authority of the United States. They can't be created or emoluments. Section 7. Let's get to that one. And Section 7, once again, using a different color. Switch it up a bit. Make it colorful. We're going to use orange this time. Section 7 talks about how Congress makes laws. So how a bill becomes a law. Alright, so following on here, starting here, new bills or laws can be considered in the House, not in the Senate, okay? However, there are some instances where the Senate can consider bills or laws as well. So, although they might not be able to do that, they would have to be arisen, and it has to deal with, here in this instance, revenue. After the bills have been voted on, they will go to the president for approval. So after a vote has been cast, the bill has been put into that particular house, has been argued, debated. It goes to the president for approval or veto. We just got news, what was it, yesterday, right? That the president actually vetoed a bill for the first time. So every bill which shall be passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approves the bill, okay, if he approves the bill, I'm sorry, let's just kind of go back to if he vetoed. So if the bill is vetoed, it will have to go back to the House of Congress that it was originally proposed, with reasons why by the president. So the president has to say, the president of the United States, veto this bill because 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so he can say, shall you approve and sign, but shall return to it, and with his objections right here to that house in which it shall have originated, and who shall enter the objections at large on their journal and proceed to consider it. So they could consider these particular objections that the president has, and then they do have a right, if they want to to fix those proceedings, or if they're so stuck, they're like, no, we're not budging. This is the bill that we drafted. We're not making any changes. You're going to have to take it as it is. That is also an option. So if Congress gets a 2/3 majority, they vote for it again, then the bill becomes a law despite the president's veto. Congress must record names and their vote in the congressional record. So they had to go back 2/3 vote. It shall become a law. And they have to say the yeas and the nays, voting for and against the bill shall be entered in the journal of each house. As I stated, we call that the congressional record. And if any bill shall not be returned by the Congress within 10 days, with the exception of Sundays, after it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law. So if the president doesn't sign the proposed bill to Congress within 10 days, then the bill becomes law. However, if Congress is on break, then the bill doesn't become a law. So there's these kind of exceptions to the rule. So sometimes you gotta hope that the Senate isn't, or Congress isn't on a break, which hardly happens, because if they want a bill to pass, they probably won't go on break because of this rule. Now, the president must approve all votes and resolutions that Congress makes. So if the president doesn't approve, 2/3 of the senators and representatives can vote to override the president's objections. So there's this opportunity to override. Okay? There's the opportunity to override the president's objections, just as they would to pass a bill the president disapproves. We will later discuss how a bill becomes a law, but this is kind of how they outline this. So here, this is where we get this opportunity to override. Alright, Section 8, the most famous section of the Constitution. This is what Congress can do. Alright, the most famous part of this section of Article 1. Alright, we all know, as I stated in my previous lecture, this is what we know this to be as the famous enumerated powers. Alright, enumerated powers of the Constitution. Enumerated powers, we know these are powers given to Congress. Alright, and what are the powers? Here we go. Set and collect taxes. Yay, they get to take our money. Right, here we go. Impose taxes. So for me, I will have to go and I have to file taxes, and whatever money I make, you know, the government wants a piece of it. They want a piece of my little earnings that I get. Alright. And also, so they can pay the national debt. That's why we have the Treasury Department and why Alexander Hamilton had the National Bank, so they can pay the debts of the war. Alright? And they can build an army. Isn't that great? Provide the common defense. Oh, look at what that sounds familiar. And welfare of the United States. That sounds awfully familiar. That sounds like new color. What does that sound like? That sounds pretty familiar. The preamble. Oh, the quoting of the preamble right there. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. So you can't have more excise or more taxes than another state, right? not only can we collect money from the citizens, but we can also borrow. We have the option to borrow. We can take money from other people. Isn't that great? Borrow money. Congress can oversee businesses with other nations, right? Regulate commerce in other nations between states and Indian tribes, and Native Americans. So in this case, it will be Native Americans. Right? To establish, Congress can establish rules for immigration. So this is rule of naturalization is pretty much immigration. And uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies. So bankruptcy throughout the United States. Congress can print money, printing of the money, and establishes value relative to the money of other countries and can value of weights and measures. All right, Congress can determine the punishment of for people who print counterfeit money. They can establish post offices and roads. So the post office, your local post office, they establish that. Just remember, your post office workers that deliver your mail, they are considered federal employees. So I don't want to go to completely extreme, but if someone were to kill a post office worker, they'll be charged federally. So I wouldn't even think of it that way. Post roads is also considered routes. They can issue patents and copyrights, right there, patents and copyrights for a limited amount of time to protect the inventions and writings of scientists and authors and to encourage the development of science and other skills that benefit society. All right? So we're talking patents and copyrights. All right, and they can establish a system of legal courts. Tribunals are considered legal courts below the Supreme Court, inferior to the Supreme Court. So tribunals are also considered a court, a legal court in this aspect. All right. Next, they can determine what constitute a crime at sea and decide how to punish the individuals or countries that commit these crimes. There you go. They can declare war, allow private ships to capture enemy ships during war, so kind of like pirates, and make rules about catching enemies on land and at sea, right? Moving on. They can create to fund an army, but can't give money to the army for more than 2-year period without reevaluation. So they have to, every 2 years, they have to figure out how much money a particular branch of the military needs to continue their work. Congress can create and maintain a navy. Pretty straightforward. Congress can make rules to run and regulate the army. You gotta regulate the army. Congress can order the civilian militias to enforce the laws of the country and end rebellions and defend against invasions. So national security and defense. Okay? So although the president, as you will learn, the president is the commander-in-chief of the army, of the military, and he can make calls that Congress cannot. So military calls, as far as operations and things like that, Congress has to be able to fund it, right? All right, Congress can order civilian militias to enforce the laws of the country. All right. And end rebellions and defend against invasions. So here's this word militia, and we learned that's in the Second Amendment, right? Congress can organize and provide weapons for civilian militias. The states will appoint officers and train the militias according to the rules developed by Congress. Congress, moving on. So Congress will have authority over the laws of the separate district that will become the official capital of the United States. Here we go. And let me show you that. So basically we can see, actually, you know what, let's go to lighter blue. Switch it up a bit again. So, carrying and executing foregoing powers and powers vested in the Constitution and the government of the United States and any department or officer thereof. And Congress will have that authority to create a separate district. So this is the creation of a separate district that will become the official capital of the U.S. And it will be no longer than 10 square miles and will be given to Congress by the states. Congress will have authority, bases, and other government facilities. And if you know our capital, our nation's capital, there it is, Washington, D.C. There it is. This is where Washington, D.C. has been established. All right. Now, Congress will make laws that are necessary and proper. Congress can make laws that are necessary and proper. Oh, that sounds familiar, right? To do everything listed above. So everything from this article upward, they will make laws that are necessary and proper to do everything listed above and throughout this Constitution. So they're like, well, we can't just include everything above it. We got to include everything vested within the Constitution. So now that we know what Congress can do, let's figure out what they can't do. So that's where Section 9 comes in. So let's move on there. What Congress can't do. What can't they do? So Congress can't stop that states from importing importing people until 1808, right? But it does have the right to tax states as much as $10 per imported person. Okay? So, migration and importation of people, so they can import people. They can't do that. Alright? Not exceeding $10 for each person. So, you can't import people. That's not cool at all. Alright, Congress can't imprison people without accusing them of a crime, except when a rebellion or invasion threatens the public safety. So, they can't, it has to be the nation's security must be at risk for this to take place. Congress cannot pass laws that take away individual civil liberties or private property without a trial. Congress also can't pass laws that punish people for acts they committed before those acts became illegal. So that is what we know that to be an ex post facto law. All right, Congress cannot tax individuals directly unless it taxes every citizen counted in the census mentioned earlier. And this was changed by the 16th Amendment, so we got to change here. This was changed by the 16th Amendment. Congress can't tax anything that the states export. There it is. Congress can't favor one state over another. No preferences, no favors. Can't have any favorites. All right. In regards to business matters, so that's what they're referring to. And Congress can't spend money from the Treasury unless permitted by law and must publish a record of its expenses from time to time. So they gotta, like, we have to show our financial records. Well, they gotta show their financial records, right? Right here. You gotta have a statement. Show me the money. Show me the money. All right. The U.S. government can't give people titles of nobility. Now, you might see this in an exception here. So, an exception here from another country would be England. England does do this a lot. They do a lot of nobilities. That's an exception. All right. People working in public office can't accept gifts, offices, or titles from other rulers or countries without the approval of Congress. Because we don't want to show any impropriety. We know what Congress can and cannot do. Now let's focus on what the states can do. So we're going to shift to the states. And then some of these were actually... So states' rights here. And as you know in our previous lecture, we know this to be, if you can shout it out or say it out loud, you should have said reserved powers. All right. So no state shall enter into a treaty or an alliance with other countries. They can't print their own money, issue local loans, or authorize anything besides gold and silver money as payment for debts. States also can't seize private property, right? Can't seize private property. States can't seize private property, pass ex post facto laws, alter private contracts, or award titles to nobility to individuals. States can't tax imports without the approval of Congress unless it is absolutely necessary for inspection purposes. Any taxes collected on imports and exports must be given to the U.S. government. All right, you got to give it to the government, right? Congress can revise state laws concerning taxes on imports and exports. So if a state representative believes that their state law should be changed, then their representative can actually bring that up in Congress, and they can actually bring it up in Congress, and Congress can make that vote for consideration to make those changes if needed. And states can't tax the cargo of ships without the approval of Congress. They can't maintain troops or warships in times of peace or making agreements with other states or countries. They can't fight war without the approval of Congress, and except in defense against an invasion or in extreme emergencies where there is no time to consult Congress. So, there has to be a state of emergency. And some of these things you can learn, it was more like 9/11, where we have some of these things taking place. So this concludes. Was a very long lesson because we're going over the powers of Congress, and we're going over the Constitution. So it will take a little bit long. It did take a little bit long. But this does conclude our lesson on Article 1. Next time we will focus on Article 2. So stay tuned for that.